Alexander the Great, born Alexander III on July 20 or 21, 356 BC, in the ancient city of Pella, the capital of the Kingdom of Macedon in northern Greece, entered the world amid legends and omens that would shape his mythic legacy, as the son of King Philip II, a brilliant military reformer who transformed Macedon from a peripheral Greek state into a dominant power through innovations like the Sarissa pike and professional army, and Queen Olympias, a princess from the neighboring kingdom of Epirus, daughter of Neoptolemus I, known for her fervent devotion to Dionysian cults and serpents, which fueled rumors of divine conception, including tales of Olympias dreaming of a thunderbolt from Zeus striking her womb and Philip envisioning a lion-sealed seal on her belly, interpreted by seers as foretelling a son of leonine courage and conquest. These stories, propagated by ancient historians like Plutarch in his Life of Alexander, blended with the coincidental burning of the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus on the day of his birth, July 21, according to some accounts, leading the philosopher Hegesias of Magnesia to quip that the goddess was too busy attending the newborn to save her temple, while Persian magi reportedly saw it as an omen of Asia's impending doom. Growing up in the royal palace at Pella, a bustling hub of Macedonian nobility with its mosaic-floored halls and frescoed walls depicting heroic hunts, young Alexander was the eldest legitimate son, though Philip had other children from his 7 or 8 wives, including a half-brother Aristotle, later Philip III, who suffered from intellectual disabilities possibly due to poisoning by Olympias, and daughters like Thessalonike and Cynae, the latter a warrior princess who trained in arms. Alexander's early childhood was marked by the absence of his campaigning father, leaving him under the influence of his ambitious mother, who instilled in him a sense of divine destiny and Greek heroic ideals from Homer's Iliad, while his nurse Launike, sister of the future general Clitus the Black, provided maternal care, and strict tutors like Leonidas, a relative of Olympias, enforced discipline, searching his belongings for luxuries and teaching endurance through Spartan-like regimens of running, riding, and hunting in the rugged Macedonian highlands, where Alexander honed his physical prowess, once enduring a grueling march without complaint to impress his mentors. At around age 10, in a famous anecdote from Plutarch, Alexander tamed the wild Thessalian stallion Bucephalus, a massive black horse with a white star on its forehead that no one else could mount, noticing its fear of its own shadow and turning it toward the sun to calm it, earning Philip's tearful proclamation that Macedon was too small for such a son and he must seek a greater kingdom, a prophecy that foreshadowed his world-conquering path. Bucephalus would become his faithful warhorse, carrying him through battles until its death in India nearly 2 decades later, honored with the founding of the city Bucephala on the Hydaspes River. By age 13, recognizing his son's precocious intellect and need for advanced education, Philip hired the renowned philosopher Aristotle, then 42 and a former student of Plato at the Academy in Athens, to tutor Alexander at the secluded Temple of the Nymphs in Mysa, a picturesque site amid olive groves and springs about 20 miles from Pella, where from 343 to 340 BC, Aristotle instructed not only Alexander but a select group of noble Macedonian youths who would become his lifelong companions and generals, including Ptolemy I Soter, founder of Egypt's Ptolemaic dynasty, Hephaestion, his closest friend and possible lover, often compared to Achilles Patroclus, Cassander, son of Antipater and future king who would orchestrate the murder of Alexander's family, Harpalus, later his treasurer, and others like Nearchus, his admiral, and Perdiccas, a key bodyguard. Aristotle's curriculum, tailored to prepare a future ruler, encompassed philosophy, ethics from works like the Nicomachean Ethics, named after Aristotle's son but possibly influenced by Alexander's studies, logic, rhetoric, poetry with a focus on Homer. Alexander kept an annotated copy of the Iliad under his pillow, calling it his provision for the campaign. Natural sciences including biology and zoology, where Aristotle's dissections and classifications inspired Alexander's later patronage of scientific expeditions during conquests, medicine, which equipped him to treat wounded soldiers personally, and politics, drawing from Aristotle's Politics to discuss ideal governance, though Alexander would later diverge by embracing multicultural empire building over Aristotle's ethnocentric views on Greeks versus barbarians, famously rebuking his tutor in a letter for publishing esoteric teachings. This 3-year tutelage fostered Alexander's lifelong curiosity, leading him to take scholars like Callisthenes, Aristotle's nephew, on campaigns to document geography, flora, and fauna, contributing to works like Anaximenes of Lampsacus' Histories, and his admiration for intellectual figures. Though tensions arose when Alexander executed Callisthenes in 327 BC for resisting proskynesis, the Persian custom of prostration he adopted. During this period, Alexander also gained early military experience. At 16 in 340 BC, while Philip besieged Byzantium, he served as regent, quelling a revolt by the Mede tribe in Thrace, storming their capital, expelling inhabitants, and founding Alexandropolis, his first-named city, demonstrating precocious strategic acumen and a penchant for urban foundation that would define his empire. In 338 BC, at the pivotal Battle of Chaeronea near Thebes, where Philip's 30,000 Macedonians crushed a combined Athenian-Theban force of 35,000, Alexander, commanding the left wing's companion cavalry at age 18, led a decisive charge that annihilated the elite Theban sacred band, saving his father's life in the melee and earning praise for his bravery. A victory that established Macedonian hegemony over Greece through the League of Corinth, where Philip was elected hegemon for a planned Persian invasion, though Alexander's role highlighted his emerging leadership. Family tensions escalated in 337 BC when Philip married Cleopatra Eurydice, niece of General Attalus, a union that produced a potential rival heir and led to a drunken banquet quarrel where Attalus insulted Alexander's legitimacy by toasting a legitimate successor, prompting Alexander to hurl a cup at him and Philip to draw his sword on his son, only to stumble in intoxication, eliciting Alexander's famous retort, "Here is the man who was making ready to cross from Europe to Asia, and who cannot even cross from one table to another without losing his balance." This feud drove Alexander and Olympias into exile, her to Epirus, him briefly to Illyria, until reconciled by Corinthian diplomat Demaratus, but suspicions lingered, especially after Philip's daughter Europa was born, threatening Alexander's succession. Philip's assassination on October 25, 336 BC, at Aegae, modern Vergina, during his daughter Cleopatra's wedding to Olympias' brother Alexander I of Epirus, was carried out by Pausanias of Orestes, a royal bodyguard motivated by personal grievances after being assaulted on Philip's orders. Though ancient sources like Diodorus Siculus and Justin implicate Olympias and possibly Alexander in orchestrating it, with motives tied to succession fears and Persian gold from Darius III, who ascended the Achaemenid throne that year, Pausanias was killed fleeing, preventing interrogation, but Alexander swiftly executed other suspects, including the Lyncestian princes and later Attalus in Asia, while sparing his half-brother Aridaeus. Proclaimed king at 20 by the Macedonian assembly and army, Alexander inherited a unified Greece but faced immediate revolts, in Thrace, Thessaly, Athens, and Thebes, where Demosthenes branded him a boy unworthy of hegemony. Demonstrating ruthless efficiency, he marched south with 3,000 cavalry, securing Thessaly's allegiance at Tempe, convened the Amphictyonic Council at Thermopylae to affirm his leadership, and at Corinth was reconfirmed hegemon of the Hellenic League, where he encountered the Cynic philosopher Diogenes in his tub, asking what he could do for him, only to receive the reply, "Stand out of my light," prompting Alexander's admiration. "If I were not Alexander, who would be Diogenes?" In spring 335 BC, Alexander launched a northern campaign to secure his flanks before invading Persia, crossing the Balkans with 15,000 men, defeating Thracians at Mount Haemus by rolling wagons down slopes to break their phalanx, subduing the Triballi near the Liginus River, and crossing the Danube to rout the Geti, using ships from Byzantium for the first European crossing of the river, then turning west to crush Illyrian rebels under King Clitus of the Taulantiae and Glaucias of the Taulantiae at the siege of Pelium, a fortified hill town, employing catapults and feints to force surrender, securing tribute and alliances. Rumors of his death sparked Theban revolt, backed by Athens, but Alexander's lightning 250-mile march in 13 days besieged Thebes, storming it after a breach by Perdiccas' battalion, resulting in 6,000 Theban deaths, 30,000 enslaved, and the city razed except for temples and Pindar's house, a terror tactic that quelled Greek unrest, with Athens submitting and Alexander pardoning Demosthenes, leaving Antipater as regent with 12,000 troops to maintain order. In spring 334 BC, Alexander launched his Persian campaign, crossing the Hellespont with 40,000 infantry, 5,000 to 7,000 cavalry, and a fleet of 120 warships under Nicanor, funded by Philip's treasury and loans from Macedonian nobles, symbolically hurling a spear into Asian soil at Troy, where he honored Achilles' tomb, claiming the continent as Spear-won land, and sacrificed to Protesilaus, the first Greek ashore in the Trojan War. His first major victory came at the Battle of the Granicus River in May 334 BC near the Sea of Marmara, where he charged across the ford against 20,000 Persian cavalry and 20,000 Greek mercenaries under Memnon of Rhodes and satraps like Arcides, defeating them with 1,000 Macedonian casualties versus 4,000 Persian, capturing Sardis' treasury of 600 talents, appointing Parmenion to garrison duties, and granting autonomy to Ionian cities like Ephesus, where he funded the Temple of Artemis. Reconstruction, expelling Persian oligarchies and installing democracies to foster loyalty. Advancing south, Alexander besieged Miletus in summer 334 BC, capturing it after a naval blockade and land assault, then faced stiff resistance at Halicarnassus, capital of Caria, defended by Memnon and Orontabates with 40,000 troops and massive walls, enduring a 2-month siege involving mining, countermining, and sallies, ultimately breaching the walls in September 334 BC, though the citadel held until he left a garrison under Ptolemy, reinstalling Queen Ada as satrap after her adoption of him as son, a move securing Curia's loyalty. Wintering in Lycia and Pamphylia, he subdued coastal towns like Phaselis and Aspendos, then marched inland to Phrygia, arriving at Gordium in spring 333 BC, where he famously untied, or slashed, the Gordian knot, a wagon yoke bound with cornel bark symbolizing rule over Asia, fulfilling the oracle that its solver would conquer the continent, a propaganda coup amplified by a thunderstorm interpreted as Zeus' approval. Descending through the Cilician gates, he fell ill with fever at Tarsus, treated by physician Philip of Acarnania amid suspicions of poisoning by Parmenion, recovering to face Darius III at the Battle of Issus on November 5, 333 BC, in a narrow coastal plain near the Panaris River in southern Turkey, where Alexander's 40,000 troops outmaneuvered Darius' 100,000, with a flanking cavalry charge led by Alexander personally breaking the Persian left, causing Darius to flee and abandon his chariot, tent, and family, mother Sisygambes, wife Statira, and children, who Alexander treated honorably, with Sisygambes adopting him as son, rejecting Darius' peace offer of half the empire and marriage to Statira, declaring himself Asia's lord. Turning south to secure the Levant and deny Persia naval bases, Alexander besieged Tyre from January to July 332 BC, the island city connected by a mole constructed under fire from catapults and towers, enduring naval counterattacks and storms, finally storming the walls with ships and ladders, resulting in 8,000 Tyrian deaths, 30,000 enslaved, and 2,000 crucified along the shore as punishment for resistance, a brutal display that deterred further defiance. Continuing to Gaza, Alexander faced resistance from Battus, the Persian governor, besieging the fortified hill town for 2 months in autumn 332 BC, sustaining a severe shoulder wound from a catapult bolt while directing mines, but capturing it, dragging Battus behind a chariot like Achilles with Hector, massacring defenders, and enslaving survivors, opening the path to Egypt, where in November 332 BC he was welcomed as liberator from Persian rule, crowned pharaoh at Memphis with the double crown, sacrificing to Apis and other gods to legitimize his rule, and founding Alexandria at the canopic mouth of the Nile, designed by architect Dinocrates as a grid-planned metropolis with a lighthouse site, later the Pharos, and libraries, becoming a hub of Hellenistic culture. Trekking 300 miles through the Libyan desert to the Siwa oasis in early 331 BC, he consulted the oracle of Zeus Ammon, greeted as son of Zeus, in a private audience, details kept secret but leaked to bolster his divinity claims, influencing his later deification demands. Before returning to Memphis to reorganize Egypt under Macedonian military command with Egyptian nomarchs for administration, appointing Cleomenes of Naucratis as finance overseer, and leaving a garrison under Pantaleon. Crossing back into Asia via Tyre in spring 331 BC, Alexander advanced to Thapsacus on the Euphrates, crossing unopposed as Darius gathered forces at Arbela, then marched to the Tigris, defeating a Persian scouting force under Mazius, and on October 1, 331 BC, clashed at the Battle of Gaugamela near modern Erbil, Iraq, where his 47,000 troops faced Darius' 200,000 to 1 million, exaggerated figures, employing an oblique order to draw out the Persian left, then charging the gap with companion cavalry, routing Darius, who fled again, abandoning his chariot and family treasures, with Macedonian losses at 500 dead versus 40,000 Persian, opening Babylon's gates where Mazius surrendered the city and its vast treasury of 180,000 talents, allowing Alexander to enter triumphantly on a golden chariot, hailed as King of Asia. Appointing Mazius as satrap, the first Persian in such a role, to blend administrations, he rested his army for a month, then marched to Susa in November 331 BC, capturing its 50,000 talent treasury intact, sending gifts to Greece including 300 suits of Persian armor for Athens' Parthenon. Inscribed, Alexander son of Philip and the Greeks accept the Lacedaemonians. Then pushed through the Uxian defile, bribing hill tribes, and defeated Ariobarzanes at the Persian gates in January 330 BC, a narrow pass where rockslides killed many, but Alexander's flanking night march via local guides captured the position, allowing entry to Persepolis, the ceremonial capital, where he seized 120,000 talents and permitted a controlled sack, possibly burning the palace in revenge for Xerxes' destruction of Athens in 480 BC, though some sources like Arrian attribute it to a drunken revel with courtesan Thais. Pursuing Darius northward, Alexander reached Media in spring 330 BC, where Darius fled to Bactria but was betrayed and killed by satrap Bessus in July 330 BC near Hecatompylos, his body found stabbed in a wagon. Alexander honored him with a royal funeral at Persepolis, proclaiming himself Achaemenid successor to legitimize rule over Persians, then executed Bessus after capturing him in 329 BC, subjecting him to nose and ear mutilation before crucifixion, a Persian punishment for regicide. From 330 to 327 BC, Alexander campaigned in Central Asia, subduing revolts in Aria, Drangiana, and Arachosia, founding cities like Alexandria Ariana, Herat, and Alexandria Arachosia, Kandahar, then entering Bactria and Sogdia, where he besieged the rock of Aria Mazes in 329 BC, using mountaineers to scale cliffs, prompting surrender with the quip that his men had wings, and married Roxana, daughter of Oxyartes, in 328 BC after capturing the Sogdian rock, a political union to secure local nobility that produced his son Alexander IV, though Roxana's jealousy led to rumored murders. This period saw growing paranoia. In 330 BC, he executed Philotas, son of Parmenion, for failing to report a plot, then assassinated Parmenion preemptively. In 328 BC, during a drunken quarrel at Marikanda, Samarkand, he killed Clitus the Black, who criticized his Persian leanings, plunging into remorse, and in 327 BC, the Pages conspiracy led to Callisthenes' execution for opposing proskynesis, alienating Greek intellectuals. Adopting Persian dress, court rituals, and integrating Iranian troops like the Epigoni, 30,000 youths trained Macedonian style, fostered resentment, culminating in the 328 BC Opus Mutiny, resolved by a reconciliation banquet. In spring 327 BC, Alexander invaded India through the Hindu Kush, subduing Aspagioi and Assakenoi tribes, besieging Massaga where he massacred 7,000 Indian mercenaries after surrender, a rare breach of honor, and capturing Aurnos Rock in early 326 BC, a cliff fortress deemed impregnable by Heracles, using earthworks to bridge a ravine. Crossing the Indus, he allied with Taxiles of Taxila, then faced Porus at the Battle of the Hydaspes in May 326 BC, where against 20,000 infantry, 2,000 cavalry, and 200 elephants, Alexander's 15,000 troops used a flanking river crossing under storm cover, defeating Porus in a bloody clash that killed Bucephalus, founding Nicaea and Bucephala, and reinstating Porus as satrap. Pushing to the Hyphasis, Bios, river, his exhausted army mutinied in September 326 BC, refusing further advance amid monsoons and rumors of vast Indian armies, forcing retreat after altars marking his eastern limit. Descending the Indus, he subdued the Mali at Multan in November 326 BC, suffering a near-fatal lung wound from an arrow while scaling walls. requiring surgery by Critobulus, with troops fearing his death until he waved from a ship. Dividing forces, he led 120,000 through the Gadrosian desert in autumn 325 BC, a disastrous 60-day march losing three-quarters to starvation and heat, while Craterus marched inland and Nearchus sailed the coast, reuniting at Pura, then Carmania where Alexander held Dionysian revels. Returning to Persia in winter 325 BC, Alexander purged corrupt satraps, executing 6 like Harpalus who fled with 5,000 talents, and in 324 BC at Susa orchestrated the mass weddings, marrying 80 officers to Persian nobles, including himself to Statira and Perisitis, daughters of Darius III and Artaxerxes III, while 10,000 soldiers wed Asian wives with dowries, promoting cultural fusion but sparking the Opus Mutiny in summer 324 BC, where Macedonians protested Persian integration and discharges. Alexander disarmed them, appointed Persians to elite units, then reconciled at a banquet of 9,000, praying for harmony, discharging 10,000 veterans with bonuses under Craterus. Hephaestion's death from fever in October 324 BC at Ecbatana devastated Alexander, who mourned extravagantly with a 120-talent funeral pyre, games, and deification decrees, possibly accelerating his own decline through grief and excess. In Babylon by May 323 BC, planning Arabian and Carthaginian campaigns, he fell ill after a banquet on May 29, suffering fever, pain, and paralysis, dying on June 10 or 11, 323 BC, at 32, after farewells to troops and cryptic words on succession, to the strongest, or to Craterus, with causes debated, malaria, typhoid, West Nile virus, pancreatitis, or poisoning by Aristotle's agents or rivals like Antipater, though recent theories like a 2018 study suggest Guillain-Barré syndrome, with apparent death while alive, explaining mummification delays. His body, preserved in honey, was hijacked by Ptolemy to Alexandria for burial in a gold sarcophagus, later a glass one, visited by emperors like Augustus, though lost after 391 AD. His posthumous son Alexander IV by Roxana, and possible illegitimate Heracles by Bar-Sine, were murdered in the wars of the Diadochi, 322–281 BC, fragmenting the empire into kingdoms, Ptolemaic Egypt, Seleucid Asia, Antigonid Macedon, and others, ushering the Hellenistic age with Greek cultural diffusion via Koine. Language, art like the Laocoon, philosophy from Stoicism to Epicureanism, and cities from Aeconum to Antioch, influencing Rome, Byzantium, and Islam, with Alexander's legacy as undefeated conqueror inspiring figures like Julius Caesar, Napoleon, and in literature from the Alexander romances medieval tales of flying machines and submarines to modern films like Oliver Stone's 2004 biopic, though criticized for brutality in sieges and cultural impositions. The mistakes that led to Alexander the Great's downfall encompassed a series of strategic, personal, and administrative errors that hastened his premature death and the swift disintegration of his vast empire. His relentless overextension of campaigns, particularly the grueling invasion of India in 327–325 BC, exhausted his troops through monsoons, deserts, and unfamiliar terrains, leading to mutiny at the Hyphasis River and massive losses in Gidrosia, up to 75% of his force, weakening morale and his health, as the Hydaspes wound nearly killed him and contributed to chronic issues. Alienating his Macedonian core by adopting Persian customs like proskynesis and dress from 330 BC onward fostered paranoia and purges, including the executions of loyalists like Parmenion, Philotas, and Clytus, eroding trust and creating internal enemies who may have plotted his poisoning. Failing to designate a clear successor, despite heirs like Alexander IV and Heracles, sparked the Diadochi Wars immediately after his 323 BC death, as generals like Perdiccas, Antipater, and Ptolemy vied for power, fragmenting the empire within years. His cultural fusion policies, while visionary, were rushed and resisted, as the Susa weddings of 324 BC incited mutinies without sufficient integration time, and his growing megalomania, demanding divine honors from 331 BC after Siwa, isolated him from Greek allies. Personal excesses, including heavy drinking noted by Arrian and Plutarch, likely exacerbated health problems like fever and liver issues, culminating in his Babylon illness, possibly typhoid or malaria, amid grief over Hephaestion's death, which some historians link to psychological decline. These errors not only cut short his life at 32 but ensured his empire, spanning 2 million square miles, collapsed into warring states, a tragic irony for history's greatest conqueror.